Alrighty, so we should be live here for round 2 of our Q&A. As you'll see in the background, we just did a bit of a mission last night and got these bookcases in, so we're going to be getting the shelving in, getting the books on, and yeah, the studio will be taking place even better. How are you doing today, Lockie?
Doing pretty bloody good, man. Cracking into more deep study, so
yeah,
it's a good start.
Good stuff, yeah. Just starting my semester as of today, actually, classes begin. So this is, I think it would be fall semester in the US, so be another 15 weeks before the end of the year. But yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Got some fun classes. But yeah, hopefully we've got some of you here today, just testing that this thing is working. Also hit 7K subscribers on YouTube as of this morning, which is pretty exciting. Yeah, we'll crack into the questions then. We got a few extra on Instagram sort of over the past week, but there's still a few heavy hitters to work through from previous, so we'll crack into it. What have we got up first, Lockie?
Well, the first question is, how can fathers repair relationships with sons when they are the wrong examples?
Yeah, we were just discussing this before. It's a pretty complicated question. I guess to explain what I think the question means, I think, we talk about sort of generational wounds and intergenerational wounds, and the reality is that this problem of lack of fatherhood or lack of father figures is not just within our generation, but it's in the preceding generations too. So I think what the listener is asking, and what I've had discussions around this even just recently, is that, let's say you are a father in your 40s, 50s, or even 60s, and I've worked with men in these age brackets. How do you regain legitimacy as the leader of your family, or regain legitimacy in the relationship between you and your son when you perhaps haven't lived up to the standard that you now hold in the past? Because I mean, you can imagine that conversation between a father and son, like, maybe the dad's gone back into his faith, he's praying, and he's like, oh, look, son, you need to start taking your life seriously or whatever. And the son would be like, well, what do you have to say about that? Like, you've thrown the past 40 years down the drain and now you're trying to tell me what to do. Like, I can see how there'd be a lot of bitterness and resentment there. And even if there's not bitterness and resentment, even if it's coming from a good place on the part of the father and the son, if you haven't been living that way previously, it's like that problem of the religious hypocrite, or just the hypocrite. It's like, well, who are you to tell me, So all of that being said, how do you approach a situation like that? Well, I think the first and most important thing to recognize is that I'd assume that this father has now gotten to the point where he's back on the grind, he's back taking these things seriously. But we were talking about it in the car yesterday, actually. I think there's almost a defeatist mentality on the part of older men nowadays, that they think the ship has sailed, right? That there's not really an opportunity for me to revert, that the grace is gone, my kids have already left the faith, and even if they don't say that to you, that's kind of how they behave in their actions. They're not very vigorous. They've perhaps lost some of that energy, that passion. And look, I can empathize with that, but at the same time, like, if we look at some of the saints in history, and if we look at, the analogies that our Lord uses in terms of the prodigal son and the lost sheep, seeking the one and leaving the 99 behind, is that there's always opportunity for redemption within your life. Like, even if you're at your deathbed, like, even if you're taking your final breath, Christ extends that offer of grace and forgiveness to you. So it's very important to recognize that as considering, even if you literally have thrown 20 years down the drain, maybe a marriage and a family and sons and daughters, that you think that they're lost, it's never too late. And there's actually this story in the book, The Power of the Rosary, by Gabriel Castillo, where he's talking about this exact thing that we're talking about, but between a mother and a daughter. And this mother sort of has a reversion to the faith, and she begins praying 4 rosaries a day for the conversion of her daughter, because her daughter's just, you know, doing all the wrong things, substance abuse and all of this stuff. And she gets a call one day that the daughter was in a car crash overnight and she's in hospital in critical condition. And I believe that she arrives at the hospital and the daughter passes away, and she hears a voice in her head from our Blessed Mother saying, you know, don't worry, your daughter is with me. And would that have happened without the mother, you know, despite all of her inadequacies, at the moment of that reversion or at the moment of that conversion, she offers her life in sacrifice and prayer for the sake of someone else, and the daughter, you know, presumably was saved. So that's the kind of mentality that I think you have to take towards that. And then in terms of more personally, you know, this gripe that I have that I was talking about on yesterday's video is the problem of the sitcom dad, the kind of slightly overweight, he's cracking all these stupid dad jokes, the woman is the one that wears the pants in the relationship. I know it's very difficult to all of a sudden turn your life around, and you also just can't come in and pretend that the previous dynamics in these relationships didn't exist. Like, if you've been living as a slob and a fat guy and never said a challenging word to anyone in your life, you're not just going to be able to click your fingers and dissolve all of that, but start taking ownership and autonomy of those areas of your life in which you can. Start going to the gym, start praying every day, start fixing your diet. Maybe in terms of the relationship with your wife and kids, don't swear at them, compliment them, try and sit down and have earnest conversations, ask how their day went. And slowly by slowly, you sort of start fixing the situation, right? Will it ever get to 100%? I don't know, maybe not, but you can't sit there and tell me that there's not things right now that you can't be doing better in terms of your relationship. So yeah, I think probably beginning with the ideal in mind, which I think I've just laid out for you, and then also, yeah, just looking at your day-to-day life and saying, well, what's one little tiny thing that I can fix today that I can do better? And, you know, and that's where your life of prayer comes in and your examination of conscience. You know, God slowly reveals these things to you, and in the measure that you can, you just fix little bit by bit.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like what you were saying is not new to like our understanding of what fatherhood is of faith. And I think what you're saying too is like, if you get that far down, let's say 20 years or so, and it's like rebuilding those relationships would be incredibly hard, because most of the time, you know, the person whom you've failed, as it were,
you've burnt them off,
yeah,
kind of.
And it's like, well, how can then is this fatherhood thing gone? And I think, at least from a theological perspective, because I'm not a father myself, so for a more like theological perspective, you can see what you're saying is fatherhood is it's not just a biological thing. It's also a spiritual reality. We've got spiritual fathers who are priests, and you know, the Holy Father, the Pope of Rome. And so fatherhood is almost a spiritual reality that's also present, not necessarily in biology, although it's obviously present there as well, and it's meant to complement what is spiritually true. And I feel like too, when you get that far down the road, it's like, have I missed my opportunity to be a father? Well, so if your understanding of fatherhood is merely
limited,
if it's just the biology of it, then yes, you have. But that's not what our Lord said. Is fatherhood is it's obviously a spiritual begetting.
Yeah.
You know, the Father begets the Son in eternity, and the very thing that makes him a father is because he's begotten a son, and the very thing that makes the Son a son is because he's the one begotten. And there's this sacrifice, as it were, that's present right then, right there, is the Father had to give something up, his whole self, to generate the Son. In eternity, obviously, the Father is never without being his person, because his generating of the Son is what establishes him as Father. And so in a way, we can think of it in a similar way. What you're saying is just like, the very thing that makes you a father is, well, what sacrifices are you willing to do now that you're in this position? And those sacrifices could lead to a re-establishment of those relationships in which you had prior. But it also establishes you a father in a different sense as well. It also creates an establishment of a true fatherhood, even though, let's say, the ship has sailed with those relationships, but at least those relationships could be conformed in some way depending on, your willingness to, as it were, to lower yourself into service.
Yeah,
Which is like just what you were saying. It just correlates with.
well, it's almost like a vulnerability, eh? Like, because I think that's the problem. You can get so entrenched in a certain identity, and it's very difficult to break out of that. And I mean, that's sort of what Christ facilitates. But I think you're right. You can choose to become a father. Let's say by omission or by ignorance or by sin, you sort of left the identity of fatherhood behind. You can actually step into that. And is that going to instantaneously heal every relationship? No. It's going to be very difficult, but you can make an active choice. And I think we have examples of that, all through history and all through the saints. And I think that is the vocation of fatherhood. It's not meant to be an easy vocation. How often do you hear that parenting is like the hardest thing you'll ever do? Or, parents, I mean, we hear so many examples of it, sadly, but parents who do come to the faith, after their kids have become adults. And it's like the spiritual passion of Our Lady, because you see your son or daughter suffering so much. And in some ways it's due to your, lack of forming them. But that's how it is, that's unfortunately how the world is.
Yeah, I think that is the very, it's a complicated question for a start, but I do feel like that is where you need to hone into that understanding of what it actually means to be a father, is obviously willful self-give of sacrifice. And that relates to our Catholic liturgy, which is obviously the center of the liturgy is the Eucharist. And in a way, the mystical Eucharist is the center of the family.
Yeah.
And as the role of the father is you are, as that spiritual father, is to consecrate your family, is to see what they are not yet, but what they are already in the end. And it's a mystical understanding, but what Christ has revealed to us is what true humanity is. And when we see that in others, we see their potential. And as a father, we are meant to, as it were, activate that potential in our family by lowering ourselves to lift them up.
Yeah, I think it's really that intentionality that has to be present within fatherhood. And I mean, it's easy to talk about this stuff after the fact, or before you enter into it, but it is a big responsibility, and you don't want to enter into it willy-nilly. Like, that doesn't mean you have to be perfect or be 40 years old or whatever to start having kids, but you've got to sort of and that's what's so beautiful about the marriage vows. It's like in sickness and in death, you commit yourself to the to your wife, to the procreation of children and the raising of future saints. And in some ways, marriage is 0% about you. Like, it's about other people and as that Eucharist of your children, which you're offering to God, and all the blessings and graces and sanctifications that come of it. But yeah, it's a beautiful way to think about it. All right, good stuff. What have we got next?
Next question is, how do we deal with a young man asking a woman for inappropriate photos?
Yeah, well, that should definitely not be happening. I mean, if a young man unfortunately does that to you as a girl, it's obviously a huge red flag, and you should basically just avoid them. I don't think there's too much else. Definitely do not lower yourself to the point of sending that through to them. I think also, maybe as broader advice, both as a man and woman or as a boy and girl, whether or not you're in a relationship, have a think about what kind of physical boundaries you want in place in terms of intimacy, because what you don't want to happen is, you have a situation happen or something happens between you which you hadn't spoken about before, and then you might be embarrassed to talk about it, and it ends up making the problem a lot worse. So I think this applies to emotional intimacy and stuff as well. Like, let's say you just started dating. Well, should you be hanging out every single weeknight? Most likely not. What are some boundaries here that you're going to place, taking into consideration your study, your career, even your kind of timeline? Like, if you're engaged and you're preparing a wedding, well, you're probably going to have to be spending a lot of time with each other, sort of going through the marriage preparation, preparing the wedding, speaking to family and stuff. But if you're dating and you're in the middle of a degree and you're working, like, and you're staying up till like midnight multiple times a week, like you've got to be very careful of there being disorder going on within that. Because I see people, it's very easy to fall into that trap, eh? So just be aware of that, whether you're in or out of a relationship, because you might think, oh yeah, nah, I'd never do that. And it's like, well, let me give you a phone call in 3 months when you met the girl of your dreams. And all of those plans went out the window. So be aware of that, do some writing, and if you are with someone, speak to your girlfriend or boyfriend, like, let's just sit down here with clarity of mind and actually write down or talk about what we want this relationship to look like over the next couple months, or just in general. That'd be my advice. Yeah. Social media in general needs some reflection, especially the adrenaline hit to the brain. Yeah, I mean, I think all of that texting and back and forth and stuff, yeah, it can become unhealthy very quickly. People need to, yeah, be aware of it. I think also talk to your friends. They can usually tell if you're acting sort of a bit out of line too, or if like, oh, he's always on his phone now texting this girl. Like, yeah, just be wary, be vigilant, as St. Paul says, because there's girls that prowl around as roaring lions seeking your attention.
Where can a fella get those holy and swoley hoodies?
Oh yeah, so we've got the new merch design for Fit for the Kingdom, created by Josh. But yeah, you should be able to find these on fftkingdom.com/store, I think it is. So you can pick up a shirt like this or a hoodie, which is the identical design. And there's also like an oversized one, which is pretty cool. But yeah, check that out on the Fit for the Kingdom website.
Next question is, for morning prayer, do you try wake up, like wash your face, etc., first so that you can focus on prayer?
Yeah. So I usually, go to the bathroom, prepare my mate. Yeah, not too much else. I try to have a big glass of water at the start of the day. I'm not always perfect, but definitely stuff like that. If I have to light the fire, that too. But I don't know. There's always a degree of sleepiness which you can't really shake early in the morning. So I think just do the best you can. Definitely try little hacks like that. Have a cup of tea, splash some water, walk around the house a bit. If you have to, I don't think it's bad to even work out first thing in the morning. Like if you find that you're actually so groggy and tired that you can't even cohesively pray, go hit a workout, or, do 15 minutes of calisthenics or something, have a cold shower and then sit down. I think that can be a helpful strategy too.
Yeah, I feel like too, just depends on your posture. Like you likely aren't going to fall asleep standing up or
Yeah.
kneeling. So
That's true.
I mean, that's at least what I do. And like I know if I'm in bed and I pray, I'll likely fall back to sleep.
Yeah,
And
no
it's like,
chance.
yeah, there's no chance. So you got to at least put your phone away from your bed where it's alarmed, so it forces you to stand up and go grab the thing, and then even having a dedicated like place where prayer is, like for example, if your prayer book is like, if you pray a prayer book or if you pray a rosary, if it's just right beside your bed, you can almost just sit off the bed and you can just sit there and pray it, which is fine, but you're likely going to not really be in a state where you're attentive, as you were saying. It's nice to have like a place in your house where, or a prayer corner where you can literally move yourself to grab the book that you're reading or the rosary that you're praying, and you can actually be attentive to what you're doing.
Yeah, that's crucial. I think I'll try and post a sermon on the chat. There's a great sermon by Father Musa. He's an Eastern Orthodox priest, but he did this amazing sermon on the importance of having a prayer corner or a home altar. And yeah, having somewhere where you can kneel. I need to encourage Fernside Furniture to start producing kneelers for all the boys, but somewhere where you can kneel, icons, a crucifix to look at, as you said, your prayer book, your rosary, even a candle. Like, why would you not replicate the same reason that we have chapels? Like, you can basically have a home chapel, and how much more does that raise your mind, soul, and your body to God, in terms of your posture of prayer? It's a no-brainer. I mean, I'd find it very difficult to pray, curled up on the couch or lying in bed. I mean, I don't even know how people would do that. I'd be snoring within seconds.
Yeah. And there's also a tradition that I've done a few times, and it's more preeminent in, for example, Eastern Rite liturgy, where you cross yourself and then you bow and you place your head on the ground and then you stand back up and cross yourself. Things like that, where you're
Yeah.
like in the morning. That's a great thing to do because it's just like, yeah, you are actually going up and down, and being attentive to prayer as well. There's so many prayers that you can do, for example, that actually encourage a proper movement that actually engages all senses towards God.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely look into that and try that if you haven't already. CB says I have to make a coffee, but then instead of scrolling, I at least do a decade of the rosary. Yeah. Yeah, look, as a general rule, guys, do not use your phone within the first 30 to 60 minutes of the day. And definitely do not use it before prayer because the basically what happens is that then your body is programmed to receive the dopamine from the phone before prayer. So you wake up looking forward to scroll, and then praying, which doesn't necessarily immediately produce dopamine, then becomes even more unappealing than it would have otherwise. If you use your phone and you get this massive dopamine spike, and then you go and pray, which is boring, well then you're basically just teaching yourself to not pray. So you need to pray to what? Sorry, you need to train yourself to wake up and then pray, and you just enter that rhythm and you program that into your body. Yeah, same with night. You know, you should definitely not use your phone at night time, but having night prayer be the last thing you do in the day. And yeah, it's a beautiful rhythm to get into it. I mean, that's what all the monks, and I think that's what Christians broadly should do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you take TRT when you get older?
Yeah, I don't plan to. We had an interesting comment about fertility on the last live stream, saying that smoking can impact fertility. But look, I take care of my health. You know, I don't eat any seed oils. I try and avoid eating gluten and not carbohydrates in general, but try to stick to like fruit. Rice is sort of my only thing. I don't eat bread. Potatoes and stuff I eat on occasion, but primarily protein and fat, which is much more stable. You've got saturated fats from animal-based products, which have a lot more vitamins and nutrients, omega-3 fatty acids and stuff to support the brain. The sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, the primary precursor of testosterone is actually cholesterol. So you need to be eating a crap ton of eggs, not just for muscle mass, but just for testosterone in general. So that's what I do to prioritize hormone health in terms of testosterone. And then EMF is a huge problem. So not sleeping with your phone beside your bed, trying to switch Wi-Fi off at night, things like that. If you're in a city, it's a bit harder because you're sort of constantly exposed to that stuff, but doing your best to like even not using the phone against your ear, using wired earbuds, not keeping it in your pocket. Little tricks like that with EMF. Blue light is also a huge one. They did the study controlling for variables or whatever, but people exposed to blue light at night were directly correlated with higher rates of obesity. So because the blue light disrupts your melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, therefore you get less sleep quality, therefore your cortisol is higher because your body can't process it, therefore you get fatter because when your cortisol is high, your immune system is down, you conserve more fat because your body basically thinks, you know, I'm about to get killed or something, like I've got to go into survival mode. So it's this massive negative spiral which happens from blue light primarily. So all of these lifestyle factors, and of course, weightlifting, spending time outdoors, getting plenty of sunlight during the day, all of that stuff is, I mean, I'd love to see an example of someone sleeping, you know, 7 to 8 hours a night, eating the diet that I just said, getting in the sun and weightlifting with low testosterone. Like if there's an example, show me, but I haven't yet seen one. And so yeah, that's my takes on TRT. I think is there some examples of people that might need it? Maybe. Yeah, I guess my advice would still remain, even if you have clinically low testosterone, start doing all of that and see what happens. Yeah, I'm pretty thoroughly convinced it's all just lifestyle decisions. Like probably 99% of modern illnesses and diseases are just caused by bad lifestyle and exposure to EMF and xenoestrogens and blue light and all this junk that's present around today. Yeah. Sweet. A hint, turn of modern at 10, turn off modem at 10 o'clock, yeah. Yeah, I think all of that stuff should be practiced. I can do a video on it if you guys want, just some health maxing, test maxing advice. But yeah, that's all I've got at the moment.
Tips for helping teenage boys become real men.
Yeah, I think it's adversity is the biggest thing. Adversity and understanding that suffering is essential for growth. I think that's why even in like secular society, sports are still encouraged, because it's such an easy de facto way of teaching someone virtue. You know, you've got to train, you've got to put in the work, you've got to work as a team, all of these things, and it's very difficult to learn that outside of sort of an environment of suffering. You know, even if it be like learning an instrument, you know, no one starts playing the piano like a magician. You know, you're crap at the start, and you've got to just grind through that. You just got to persevere through that phase. So I think putting teenage boys in situations where they're actually difficult, right? They're actually facing difficulty. That could be a hunt, it could be a camp, it could be a hike, it could be just some workouts, it could be sport, it could be pushing to do something challenging mentally, or you know, take on a job. I mean, I've been working since I was like 9 years old, but I think the majority of my virtue is just due to the fact that I had to work hard, and you just sort of learn these lessons by default, you know. So yeah, as best as you can, put them through suffering and teach them that that is the only way that you actually progress in life, by going up against a challenge that is either at the level that you are currently or even slightly beyond it, and you have to rise to meet the challenge. You know, you have to fight the dragon. So
yeah,
the more that you can enforce that, and you have to do it in a positive way. I think that's something that we do quite well as Fit for the Kingdom, is like, we're not just going in, you know, sitting in an ice lake for an hour in silence, you know, shivering, but we're actually going to go on this awesome hunt with a group of guys, and we're going to get some meat, and it's going to be challenging, but there's a reward at the top. Or same with like the St. Michael's troops, you know, we're going to mass, we're going through a workout, we're getting some formation, we're finishing with a barbecue, and you can only attend so many things like that before not getting something out of it, you know, and before it affects you as a person. So I think that's key.
No, so true. I think that's just, it relates to even the question itself of growth, is the principle of our Catholic faith, and what the fathers came to when they understood who Christ is. I think that was the difficulty in sort of establishing who Christ is, because we know that he is fully human. And I think that does something interesting, at least for understanding what growth is, or from infancy to adulthood and to eventually old age. I think what's interesting is, at least in my own recent readings of Christ in that respect, and how it relates to the question, is that Christ, when he became incarnate, the word, the logos in the Greek, is, as it were, the seed. It's the potential of your humanity.
Yeah.
Which gives you a really good outlook, because it's just like, okay, every one of us, and this is what the theologian Maximus would later come to describe to every human being, which is, every one of us have a logos, a principle. Every one of us have a potential of our growth. It's the seed, as it were, as Christ says. He you know, the sower goes out to sow, and nobody is without a seed. Everybody has a seed.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do I need to do to cultivate that soil so that my potential end can become manifest?
Yeah.
And us, as Paul would say in his epistles, we to grow into the likeness and stature of Christ.
Yeah.
And so there's a requirement in each of us to, as it were, to allow him to potentialize ourselves. As we, in a way, you could think of it like this, is in a way we aren't even true human beings yet. But we are growing into that, the one true human being, who is the one man, Christ Jesus.
The preeminent man.
It gives a good perspective, at least for me, and at least for understanding what growth is. as you said, it's like it's voluntary suffering to, as it were, align our seed, our will, our one will, with what is the one truth, which is the potential of our beings to grow into that end.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think let's say if we were to put an intermediary between that is heroes and archetypes. Like, why do we have, you know, all of these great works of fiction that are present within our culture? It's because they instantiate the logos in a certain time and place, even if it's fictional, you know, like what's the best example of masculinity that's not Christ? Like, I think it's easy to argue Aragorn from Lord of the Rings to put in that position. You know, he's the servant king. He's the humble, strong leader. He's the self-sacrificial man. And yeah, you have that in fiction, but you also need to be that to other men in your community. Like, you have Christ as the ultimate archetype. You have, let's say, the heroes of fiction or even the heroes of history, you know, the great men of history, or the saints are the most obvious example of that. Like, you have Maximilian Kolbe, you have Saint Louis the Ninth, the Saint King of France. You have, you know, you can talk about the saints all day, even great women saints, you know, great examples of virtue. How well are you living up in comparison to them? That's a very simple question to ask. And um, talking about those stories, talking about those saints with people and with your children, that helps them have an ideal to strive towards. And I think that's something that we've lost, you know, in this very sort of shallow and reductionist culture. That there is no heroes, you know, there is no legends of old. Like, you can think of like Tolkien, like in some ways he probably lived in a world which had so much more than what we have, because he had the reality in front of him, but then he was constantly just living and breathing myths, right? The great stories of mythology. And when you have that in mind, you're going about your day. It's like, it's kind of what we were talking about last week with work. You can go to work, you know, with absolutely zero will to live and think that this is meaningless, or you can go to work thinking like, this is the dragon that I'm facing today. Like, I am part of this great story of history. I am right now putting into being the story that God is writing with me in it. And I'm not 100% sure of what my role is, but
Yeah.
I'm going to do my, you know, my damn best that I'm going to be the hero, or the hero that I'm meant to be. Like, you might not be Aragorn, but you might be Faramir. Like, how essential was Faramir in the story of Lord of the Rings? And he's just like this super unassuming guy. How essential was each of the hobbits, you know? And you have to view life with the lens of the epic. And you need to, as best as you can, you need to be able to give that to your kids. I mean, what greater gift aside from the faith could you give a kid than that everything matters, you know, that you are part of this great story that is being written right now, and everything that you do matters. You know,
Yeah.
that's what they need to be told.
And this is how like ancient civilizations have always um, naturally seen the world, as the mythic world isn't this it isn't this, as you were saying, it's not actually this fantastical you know, metaphor that's, for example, this is reality here, and then we got these, you know, human beings who can do this funny thing where we can sort of create these stories for our mere entertainment, but they're worth of nothing.
Yeah, like they're just fake.
Yeah.
It's not true.
And it's like that's not what early tribes and tribes even today still understand what story is. Like you have these stories in the Amazon where tribal kids would be told these stories, and after these stories were told to them at a certain age, at a certain time, and a certain date, is they would now go off and embody these mythic characters. And when for example, studied by the journalists who was obviously studying on this tribe, it's these tribal people didn't believe, for example, they had the real world. Then they were adding some little things to help them cope and make sense of it.
Right.
Rather, they felt that the real world was always penetrating the mythic, and then the mythic was always and always penetrating the material world. And rather, they were almost like an incarnation of one another.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful because I think at least our Christian faith has always established that.
Yes.
Is that Christianity is the myth made fact.
Yeah.
Is that Christ isn't just a historical figure, as of course he is, because he's incarnate, that's to deny the incarnation. But he's also the Hans von Balthasar, the Catholic theologian, would say Christ is the axis in which history moves around.
Yeah.
But it's just logical. If you think of eternity as the unmoved thing, well, then is Christ really tossed in time? Well, no, time moves around him. And so then when we see it this way, it's actually, in a certain sense, and this is what Hans von Balthasar would qualify as, in a certain sense, there is the same distance between us and Christ now as there were between his followers and disciples, which changes completely your understanding of actually distance between you and Christ. Is actually the one center of history is actually brushing up closer than your very breath right now. Only if, as Christ said, you had eyes to see it.
It just really depends on what you mean by real. Like, Christ is more real than anything we have right now. And I would argue that myths and stories, this is super interesting. Aristotle said that poetry was more real than history, because while history was an individual fact about what happened, poetry is the distillation of it. It's kind of, it gets the meaning out of the fact. The fact is just, I did this, you did this happened. But then what's the pattern between actions? What's the pattern of meaning that we extract from that? And that's what poetry does, right? The poetry, it gets you the moral of the story. It gets you the truth behind the fact, behind the matter. So he said it was more real. Poetry is more real and more pure than a simple story, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, we might have to keep talking about that another time. What's the number length of the trim? A number 1 with a fade. It looks great. This was just pure, what do you call it? The trimmer with no plastic, just raw.
Yeah.
And I did it myself, so I haven't faded up anything on the back. Need to get my brother to help, but I'm just running a slim ship at the moment. Health maxing, yes please, that would be a great video. Yep, we'll make it happen. How can women be soldiers of the faith like men, but not become girl bosses in the process? Be one with our femininity and strong without being a man. Dang, that's an insane question. I think, thankfully, we have a very clear archetype of true femininity, and that's our Blessed Mother, who, I love that, the Magnificat in Luke chapter 2, where Mary visits Elizabeth, and she gives like a little speech, a little song about that the Lord has worked great wonders in her. It's one of my favorite parts of all the Gospels, but I recommend you read that. But Our Lady has the perfection of all of the virtues, you know, and especially most clearly what we see in the Gospels is obedience, humility, servitude, and I think most simply is unity with Christ. You know, her spiritual passion united with Christ. Father Chad Ripperger said that the most glorious moment in all of history, aside from the resurrection, was Our Lady standing at the foot of the cross during the crucifixion, because she was so perfectly united and so perfectly disposed, you know, to the will of God and through her Son, that it was literally the most glorious moment in all of history, which is insane to think about. But maybe that would be a helpful place to start, which is comparing yourself to our Blessed Mother and say, well, how could I be more obedient? How could I be more prayerful? How could I be more humble? How could I be more disposed to the will of God? And yeah, I guess it can be difficult to be, you know, to sort of fight that temptation to being a girl boss or whatever. I don't really know if there's any clear advice around that. It's very much something that you just have to apply prudence to and think about what your current situation is. But yeah, I guess just do the best with what you have in front of you. There's that example of I think it was maybe Saint Rita, but she was kind of forced to marry this guy who was like a super angry man, like wasn't very kind to her. Correct me if I'm wrong, which saint it is. And she was a faithful Catholic, and you know, whatever happened, they ended up getting married, and she just was faithful to her husband, was prayerful, was obedient, and she prayed for him every day of her life. And he got struck by some disease, and you know, this is having lived like a life of hatred and sin, and he converted on his deathbed. Um, and again, it sort of comes back to that example we were talking right at the start. But if it hadn't been for her virtue and her faith and her trust in God, you know, that man's soul might not have been saved, you know, or that person or multiple other people would not have experienced the love of Christ that she was able to bring to the situation in front of her. So be like Mary and be united to Christ, and I think the rest will have to figure itself out. I guess in terms of like practical things in the world, you know, if you're studying, be the best student you can. If you're working, be the best worker you can. You know, don't be overconfident, don't be prideful, but be diligent. You know, that's a virtue, diligence. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what we're saying like last night is sort of relates to it, and just what you're saying there is it's like Mary, but how Mary is portrayed in the Gospels is the seed of the earth, or not the seed of the earth, but the earth in which the seed is planted in. And I think that relates to femininity in the sense that Christ, as this, as it were, this head, this male archetype, um, is also the feminine via Mary. So obviously Christ isn't just the masculine and therefore he's just the archetype of men. He's the archetype of the whole of humanity, but that is received through Mary, the femininity of Christ. And in this sense, it's Christ to for example be someone who is both of the earth and both of the heaven is something that both genders have to almost bounce in between. But ultimately, obviously, the masculine is the one whom is the head by his own principle, but is of the earth by communion. And the woman is of the earth by principle, but she has to, in some sense, still bounce into now and then into the head according to her communion with Christ. And there's a place where woman is to lead. There's a place where women are to obviously to speak up against adversity.
Yeah.
But there's also a time when, for example, as the question is, it's like with the relationship of a husband and a husband is meant to be the one who is, as it were, giving fruit to his wife, and the wife is meant to be the one that is receiving the good
And making
the
it
good
greater.
seed and making
Yeah.
it greater. And I think that just relates to knowing, as we're saying, even with myth, is like knowing where, for example, the story world works inside of our world. Is are you participating? For example, if the earth just denies the heat and denies it, its growth will not be good. It'll be idolatry. As if the earth rises above itself into the heavens, which is almost a crossing of what one is not by nature, and you sort of what you get is a woman that's, for example, suppresses, denies the heavens, and or denies the masculine, and you get this femininity that develops that is almost triumphistic and wants to deny all masculinity, and which you see in our culture today is quite prevalent.
It's the Oedipal mother. It's the mother which smothers, you know, that very good and natural desire for control and care of the offspring. Well, what happens if a mother babies her 35-year-old son in the basement? Well, she actually does not become the earth that nurtures, but becomes the earth that smothers and doesn't allow for true development. So
Yeah.
I think it's, it's an important thing to really take time to think about, especially to think about the feminine gifts and think, well, how could I be cultivating these more? And it's not to say that, you know, there aren't women that are called, you know, to perhaps be more forward facing or more exterior or more vocal. Like, I think a good example of this, which we've seen, is in the pro-life movement. You know, there's many strong and intelligent women that are leading the charge from that. And I think in some ways that's suited to them because, you know, obviously we disagree with the premise that, what do they say, no uterus, no voice or whatever, that men can't speak on the topic of abortion. But it is beautiful for a woman and a mother to defend the unborn in that way. So I think there's definitely examples and situations, you know, where it's right and just, so to speak, for a woman to get into that capacity. But maybe like a negative example is like, you know, a woman in her 30s or 40s who's, you know, wearing herself down, you know, in this corporate environment, and she's actually unhappy, but she's trying to pursue this kind of idea of success, or she's almost trying to pursue this masculine vocation, right? Which is that real death to self for the sake of this thing greater than yourself. And there is some cases like that where I just think maybe, I don't know if inappropriate it's the right word, but it's just not right, you know, like you're actually kind of spoiling your feminine gifts by trying to put yourself in this box and succeed in this way where maybe God didn't intend it to be that way.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
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 Good. CB says, I like watching Sister Mary Grace and some of the public speakers there. There's a video of her, Sister Mary, on Veritas Q&A. Well, there's something, another resource to check out. All right, shall we do one more? Lust.
Just lust.
Is it? Yeah. Okay, well, I've got a long video on this. I've got like a bit of a masterclass. I think it's 37 minutes long on my channel, so I'll refer you to that. But I think if I had to give one quick thought, and I know this is going to come up again and again and again, is that the lust is it is both a natural vice and a supernatural vice. So what I mean by that is that it is not just like this huge spiritual problem that you're not going to be able to overcome, you know, unless there's some sort of great supernatural miracle. That there's natural things that you can do in terms of the virtue of temperance and abstinence to help yourself in defeating lust. What am I talking about? Do you train as a man? Like if you're a young man and you're not doing some form of physical exercise, that's your first point of call. You know, you've got all of this masculine energy, this thumos within you, and it's just sitting inside you, or you're playing video games, or obviously you're struggling with lust. You need to channel that somewhere where you can actually expend your energy. I don't believe work is sufficient. Like unless you're working 14 hours a day in the Gulag Archipelago, it is very, very likely that you should be doing some form of physical exercise. Yeah. So that'll be number one. Number two, what's your diet like? Eating hyper-processed foods and sugars is actually going to make your brain more prone to other sort of hyper-dopaminergic activities. So if you're eating shit all day, that's going to manifest in other negative behaviors. What is your relationship with your screen time? Are you using your phone in the morning and at bed or in bed? You shouldn't use your phone in bed. That's a good rule. Again, if you're struggling with doom scrolling and watching crap and Netflix and whatever, again, you're just training your mind to be constantly feeding itself pleasurable things. So what have we done? We've done training, we've done diet, we've done phone and screen usage, massive things to work on and cut down. Most likely, if you fix those three, you're going to find you're not even struggling with lust anymore. Sleep, make sure you're sleeping enough. Prayer, make sure you're actually praying to be delivered from lust. You should have a regular habit of prayer. You fix all of those things and you control what's going into your mind. You're not, you know, being fed garbage from your phone, you know, or having pictures of scantily dressed women show up in your feed. You're going to be tempted a lot less. Is it going to go away completely? No, but you've removed 90% of the issue just by doing those external habits. There are other things like custody of the eyes, obviously fidelity to daily prayer, the daily rosary is huge. There are those things which you can and should be doing, but I think for most guys, it is really just an immediate physical problem that you're not vigilant. That's really the word. Yeah. You're not vigilant about what you do with your time, about what you put into your body, about what you put into your mind, and you just need to practice a extremely much higher degree of intentionality with all of that. And that will change your life. And, you know, not only will you fix lust, but you'll actually find that you're productive and you're growing as a man. And like Goggins has a great rule. He says it's called the 40% rule, that majority of people will never even hit 40% of their potential. And I think that's completely right, because society is engineered to just make you mediocre and to just, it's kind of like the Matrix, how they're just plugged into the hallucination, and you just keep them happy enough, and they live and they die, and without ever having achieved anything. And that's majority of us right now. So that's a question I would ask yourself. Anyway, I don't want to go too rail off the question. There's another good quote that says, you're afraid to die, but what makes you think that you've even truly begun to live?
Yeah. So good. No, I definitely think you're on point with prayer being the intention there. And even what we're saying again last night with the talk of prayer is there has to be, in a way, like something in your life that is immovable, that conforms you to it, because that relates back to a previous question where we were saying, for example, Christ is the axis in which all things turn around. Eternity is that in which gravitates, in a way, because it's that which is always still. And if you have a prayer in your life that is always still, it never moves, you will gravitate to it.
Yeah.
It's something that you never compromise on. Like, for example, you may have prayers, for example, that you allow to come and go in your life. And that's normal. And there's times to do that. But you almost have to have something in your life, like a morning and night prayer or rosary that doesn't move. And if that moves, your eternal axis has moved. And you're going to gravitate to the next thing that has remained consistent.
World, the flesh, and the devil.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it. It's like, what in your life can you establish that will change you, conform you, and move you to that? And if it's lust, it is obviously prayer. And I think one thing that is pretty important is also fasting. St. John of Climacus says in his Ladder of Divine Ascent, is that in this ladder of divine ascent, our walk into conformity to heaven. There's many things in which are, for example, passions of the flesh, and those passions always relate to something that we are not conforming to. And he, as it were, prescribes to his monks that when he's dealing with lust, most of the time, the very principle of lust is gluttony.
Yeah.
Is the very
Aquinas
principle
says
of
that too.
is gluttony. So it's like, what can I do? Like picking up something once a week. Like, for example, I fast once a week and that doesn't move. That's going to be a good principle in which is, moving you to it. And you don't have to, for example, say, oh, I'm going to go full board and I'm going to chuck in like 2 fasting days a week. Maybe you do that over Lent and things like that. But you don't have to be extreme. And that's another thing you can be, it's something I find myself tempted to quite often, and what St. John of Climacus actually calls spiritual gluttony. Spiritual gluttony, where you idolize, as it were, these spiritual excesses just for validation from others,
right,
and also from things. And then you've shifted the principal core as well. Again, you've gone too far on the other end. So it's meant to be, for example, something in your life that you can put there, which is going to challenge you. Maybe that's fasting, maybe on a Friday from the time you wake up till lunchtime. Or maybe you want to pick it up and it's like, all right, I'm going to fast from the time I woke up to 3 p.m. the time that Christ died. And those things have a major.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to become perfect in what way we can, to become perfectly united to Christ without fasting. It's the only mortification that the church still prescribes, and I mean, it's been there from day one. It's right there in the Didache, fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays from flesh meats. So, yeah, without fasting, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, that would be the immediate checklist. Like, you're struggling with lust, okay, are you training? Are you praying? Are you fasting? What's your diet? What's your phone usage? And how's your sleep? Just go through that and you'll get some pretty clear things to work on. But yeah, I think to sort of wrap that up, you're right. When you lose prayer or when you don't have prayer, it's literally impossible not to get pulled by some other influence. You're going to be influenced by something. You have to choose what. And if it's not prayer, it will be the world, the flesh, or the devil. That's like basic spiritual mathematics. And I can't remember who said it, but they said that you don't have a lust problem, you have a love problem. Your love of God is not strong enough. Your desire to please Christ is not strong enough because you're effectively choosing a pleasure of the flesh over the life of grace, over the life of virtue. And I think it's important not to remove autonomy from yourself. Like, you have a lot of people saying, well, I've got an addiction, or they talk about the sin in a way that removes the ownership and responsibility from it. Like I'm stuck in habitual sin. It's like, yeah, you're habitually sinning, and through grace and prayer and through human action, you need to stop doing it. Like, let's not act as if this is, yeah, it's a very powerful vice, don't get me wrong, but, you know, you can get out of vice. Like, let's not act like this is something impossible. You don't need like a 12-step recovery program to get out of this. I don't want to sound apathetic, like I have no empathy. I understand how difficult this can be, but it's very important that you be careful of the way that you're thinking about it in your mind, because the second that you remove your autonomy from yourself, it's a hard battle to overcome, because you're sort of playing the victim. This is happening to you, and you can't fight that. You need to treat this as spiritual warfare. And as I said, I've got that video on defeating lust, but I've also got a video titled, forgot what it's called. It's about spiritual warfare. I released it recently. It's like 28 minutes about the reality of spiritual warfare. And then there's another video which is the importance of mortifying the will. So 3 steps to sort of build your self-control. And yeah, I think it was rosary, fasting, and cold showers. But all of those 3 examples, like a rosary just takes some time. A cold shower is purely mental, like it doesn't hurt your body in any single way. And fasting is obviously a bit more difficult there, but if you practice that, what you're doing is you're practicing denial of the will. You're basically saying, it's not you that's in charge, and I don't want to build like this false Gnostic distinction, but you're basically saying to your body, to the mind that wants to succumb to weakness, actually, I don't care that you want to have a hot shower. Actually, I don't care that you'd rather go on your phone or go to bed. We are praying the rosary daily. We are having cold showers 6 days a week. We are fasting every Friday. And your body can suck it up. And look, I work a very physical job and I fast on Fridays. You can fast on Fridays. You should be fasting regularly. So don't give me all of this crap that it's like, oh, I can't do it or whatever. St. Paul says in the letter to the Hebrews, have you resisted sin to the point of shedding blood? That's all I'm going to say to you. That's all St. Paul is going to say to you. Have you resisted sin to the point of shedding blood? Weekly fasting, cold showers, and a daily rosary is a very cheap price to pay for leaving habitual sin behind and growing in holiness. You should be willing to pay that every day. No dramas. So
I think too, like, do you think, like, and I do think this, that true autonomy in the modern sense is like this liberal, fanatic, ecstatic will. It's, he's this middle orientator that can move himself anywhere he wants and things like that. That's not how the Bible understands true will. Is that's the will of the as it were the bent soul towards sin. That's the very thing that is opposed to will. And I think
freedom.
that's like I think the modern sense of freedom and liberty is almost seeped into the church's understanding of what it is to be willing something. It's like, as you like, you could pick all these things that you're doing. It's like, oh, what prayer should I be doing? And then you're always constantly thinking about what I should be doing because I've got to decide. Yeah, I've got to decide. It's like true will is when you don't even decide. It's what you conform to, the good, the true, the beautiful. It's actually, as it were, beyond your nature. This is what the church fathers would come to, is you have your soul, and your soul is, as it were, has many different layers to it, many different decisive faculties. But the will for the church fathers isn't necessarily something that is of the soul's own. The true will of a soul is something that lies in between the soul and the eternal. It's the very mediating principle, as it were, of your soul. It's the very thing that gives your soul being. And so it's the very edge of your soul, as it were, what they would Maximus would call the logoi of your being. Is you have this logoi, as we were talking about earlier, this potential, this goal, this good, this true, this beautiful. And if your soul isn't in conformity to that logoi of your being, is you aren't actually truly willing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a very biblical principle. You know, the Egyptians were they free? Well, yeah, they were physically free to do what they desired, but they were enslaved to sin.
Mm.
Is secular society free? Well, yeah, they can do whatever they want, but they're actually enslaved to their sin. And true happiness, true fulfillment is it, as you said, it is when your will is aligned to our supernatural nature under God. When our will is aligned to what intellect, informed by grace, knows to be true. And that's why the path is narrow and few walk down it, because all of these influences, like, let's just take a very simple example. When I wake up in the morning and I'm tired, my intellect knows for a fact that I must get up at this time and that I must pray. So if I act on that knowledge and I get out of bed and I pray, I get out of bed on time and I pray, my will is in line with my reason. It is in line with my intellect. But if I wake up tomorrow and my intellect knows that this is true regardless of how I feel, but I allow my body, my sensual appetite to present to my will, look, bro, you're knackered, you need more sleep, let's just skip it today. And my will ends up going down that road. I've acted contrary to reason. So, and obviously it's not, you have to, as you said, sort of circling back, how do you know then what is true? Well, go to the church, go to the saints. It's, as I said, daily rosary, frequent sacraments, weekly or bi-weekly confession, pray every day, resist sin, don't frickin' watch slop on your phone all day, work hard, go to the gym. I just gave you a complete rule of life in 10 seconds. This is nothing new, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing complicated. Get on your knees, work hard, eat clean foods, pray every day. That's it. You don't need to figure it out. It's right there. Every single saint in heaven, you know, after Saint Dominic, would have prayed the rosary every day. Pray the rosary every day. No questions asked, no debating, no figuring out the theology. It's as simple as that. And Father Chad Ripperger was saying, you know, most likely when we get to heaven, the people, because there's degrees of perfection in heaven, right? The people at the top of heaven are going to be the simplest, most unassuming guys that you'd ever have thought of on earth, because they just did what they had to. They were faithful to their vocation. They followed the will of God, and that's it. It's not that complicated, guys. So, yeah, I think we don't have to beat a dead horse, but that's the beautiful thing of the spiritual tradition of the church and the sacraments, is that it's there for you to participate in. It's all there. You don't need to debate. You don't need to write. You basically don't need to think. And it comes back to the idea of retard maxing. Just freaking get into it.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll close it off there. Hopefully you enjoyed the stream. Looks like we've got 12 people watching at the moment, so pretty solid. But appreciate you guys joining. Let me know if you found this helpful. And if you've got any other questions for next week or the following week, we might skip a week, I'm not sure. Yeah, leave it in the chat or DM me on Instagram and we'll get around to it. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. Make sure you subscribe, you smash that like button, and we'll see you next time. Right, God bless.